Everyone, and welcome back to this week's Wargaming terrain tutorial. This week we're going to be making this bunker, as you can see here. There's quite a bit to this video, so I won't ramble on too much this time. Let's get started. Alright, this build today uses mainly XPS foam to form the shape of the hill that we're going to use. You would see me glue this stuff together, so I don't need to go into that in too much detail. Now we are going to shape up this hill as well using a large file and some sandpaper, which I'll show you shortly. Firstly, I just want to give a quick shout out and say a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys are fantastic and I really appreciate your help. If you would like to support me on Patreon, you can check the link in the description below. You can see here I'm just measuring out the front of this bunker where the doorway will be. Now to shape up the hill here, you can go two ways about this. This is just a really cheap hot wire foam cutter I picked up off Amazon. It was around about $19. This does make pretty short work of what we need to do here. You can also use a knife, as you'll see me do very shortly here. It's not quite as clean, but given that we're going to be covering up this hill with some sculptamold in the end of the day anyway, it's really not such a big deal. So keep that in mind. If you don't have yourself a hot wire foam cutter like this one, you can simply just use a knife to get these same cuts. I just found it was a little bit quicker with this cheap hot wire foam cutter you can see here. Now, shaping out the door, again, we don't need anything to be smooth here or perfect. We just want to get the main shape that we're looking for the hill. So about the size is right. We don't want to spend too much time trying to get these cuts all clean and perfect. As you can see here, I'm just going to file this down and shape it down a little bit with the large file here I've got, and also with a little bit of sandpaper just to smooth out some of the edges. This is just to get our basic shape for the hill, and like I said, no need to spend a great lot of time because a lot of this is going to be covered up anyway. So once you've got that done, it only takes a minute or two to shape that down. It's really easy to mold this foam. So once you've got that down, again, make sure you're using some breathing protection. So a mask or something there would be a great idea. Here I'm using a little bit of a blowtorch. So this is my Dremel blowtorch here, and I'm just really lightly just hitting this with a bit of heat to form up a couple of craters on this hill. So I want this to look like it's been damaged by maybe some mortar fire or something like that at the end, and I'm just trying to get a little bit of more depth into where these craters are going to sit on that hill. So you can build the craters up on top of the foam, so if you haven't got a means to sort of create these divots, you can just add a little bit more sculptamold when you get to that point in the process, and you can just build up your craters that way. This just gave a little bit more depth for the craters when I went and added them in down the track. Now the main base of this is just some 3mm MDF that I've cut down to size. Nothing too special about this at all. I just wanted a bit more room around the hill to place some grass, some rocks, and a few bits of scatter terrain as well. So easy enough to glue this down. You do need to remember though, it's best probably to get that shiny surface off the foam if you have it there. Just easily just rub over a piece of, I think this is 180 grit sandpaper. Just a few passes with the sandpaper over this gets rid of that shiny surface. This will just help the glue to adhere better to the rougher surface rather than the shiny surface that will come on that XPS foam when you get it from the shop. PVA glue works fine here. I didn't need too much. I just wanted to make sure that I did seal right up to the edges. So I'll smear this around a little bit just to make sure that those edges do have contact with glue. Just to try and prevent any gaps that might form there. I'm not too worried about this MDF bending. As you can see, the hill itself goes out to, fairly close to most of these edges. So with a good covering of glue and a large surface area on that foam, it should hold steady pretty well. Now the next part of this process is to make the small radio tower that I placed towards the back of this hill. Now it's a pretty simple process. The first thing I did was just went through with some small paddle pop sticks here. These are the thinner ones, and I've just cut off the rounded end on one side and then measured out the height that I want for this tower. So roughly about 11 centimeters I think I chose here, and I just measured that and then cut off the other rounded ends on these little paddle pop sticks, or stirrers if you like. Now laying these down on the table, I made sure that the width of these was the same across all four sides, so I'm building 4 separate sides. If you saw my radio tower video, you'll be pretty familiar with this process, so I will put a link to that one at the top here for you. That way you can go and check that one out. There's probably a little bit more detail in that build than I'll go through today in this video here. So Just laying these all out, making sure I'm using the lines on my cutting mat here to make sure that the width between each of the sides is the same. And as you can see, you just want to stick those down. I'm just using some painter's tape there. And to form these up, I'm just going to use these little tweezers. These ones I got from Army Painter. They are really good, actually, good quality. I know tweezers probably seem like tweezers, but look, they definitely didn't skimp on the quality of the tools that they provide there at Army Painter. So definitely check these ones out if you get a chance, and if you've got means to get a hold of them. They are really good. You get 2 in a packet, and like I said, they're pretty good quality. So there you can see I'm just using matchsticks to form up the little grids that are going to make up the sides of the radio tower here. Again, in my previous video, you'll see that in a little bit more detail. You just want to make sure that you've got enough room for those little pieces of matchstick to adhere to the glue. So you don't want these to cover the entire stirring stick when you place them down, because what that'll mean is it's harder to get the 4 sides to join up and glue together. So you want to leave yourself a bit of a gap on the edges of these stirring sticks when you put the matchsticks on, just so everything sits together nicely. So I'll just speed up through this process here of me placing these on. Again, you just want to try and make sure you follow the same pattern across all of these sides. So these are the 4 sides that I'm building up, and as you can see, yeah, it takes a little time, but there's nothing too precise about this. When you do glue it up, make sure you put something on it to weigh it down and hold it flat. The glue can sometimes make those stirring sticks warp a little bit, but so long as you've got something heavy to hold them flat while the glue dries, once they dry, they'll be nice and flat and nice and easy to glue up. So here I'm just dry fitting these together to make sure that they are going to sit properly, and I don't have too many gaps in any of this. Again, don't need to be too precise. I'm going to base coat those with some Mod Podge and black paint, and then I've just glued this together with some hot glue. So you will find that you'll have some squeeze out from the hot glue where you glue this together. I find just running around some of those areas with your craft knife and just scraping those off, smoothing it down, because we are going to apply more paint to this down the track. So you can paint this to any color you like. You can paint it at this stage of the process if you want, as soon as you get this top on it. Which is, again, is very simple. It's the same process I used in my radio towers, just a little bit of balsa wood to go around the edges and a little piece of foam to sit on the top as the top of the tower, and that'll allow you to pierce in a couple of little toothpicks or lollipop sticks or whatever you want to put in there to sort of dress this up a little bit. Hot gluing on the little pieces of balsa to form the border around the top. Very simple, nothing much to it. I won't go into a great lot of detail for that in this video here. Again, just check out my radio tower video to see some more details on that process. Easy enough to trim this up. Again, you'll probably have some overhangs and some different angles going on there, but it all works out fine in the end. Just trim it up, and then once you hit it with the paint, it'll look perfect. Now, across the front of the building here, or the bunker where I'm going to have my doorway, I want this to be a concrete face. So if you look up pictures of these types of bunkers online, you'll see that generally they'll have a concrete retaining wall at the front where the door is, and that's what I'm trying to form up here. So I'm using this little 45-degree cutter that I made up. I've showed that off in a previous video. It's really handy for cutting perfect 45s into your foam board. It's just honestly, it's a piece of scrap wood cut at a 45-degree angle with a craft blade screwed on there, so not much to that. But I found having those angles there just help this all sit together quite a bit more nicely. So you don't need it to be perfect, because it is just going to be sitting in against this foam, and we are going to be sculptor molding around the edges of it. But you can see there, I've just cut all those little pieces there just to sort of form in and fit together on the front of the building, so I don't have too many gaps. Now here I'm just building a quick door for the front of the bunker. Now again, this is a process I've covered in my shipping container video. It is just cereal box cardboard cut into little strips and glued on there. I've made up a couple of little hinges for this one. I'll put a link to that shipping container video, because again, it does go into the process for making those doors quite a bit more detail. Now to glue all this in, I've just cut those to shape, making sure that I've got a little bit of overhang on those concrete walls, and I'm just going to PVA glue them into place, and using some pins I'll hold them there. That'll just make sure that they don't sort of bend out or warp as the glue dries, and make sure that they stay in place for the drying process. Now once that's done, what I'm going to do here is just hit the top here with a little bit of PVA and black paint. Now the reason I did this just in one square at the top here is I'm going to actually put a little gun emplacement at the top, and originally I thought I was going to stick this down before moving on, so I thought it was probably a good idea there to black out the inside of where the gun emplacement was going to be. Turns out in the end I didn't glue the gun emplacement down till a little bit later, so you don't need to follow that step exactly at that point. You can probably, even at this point, you could have hit the entire foam board there with Mod Podge and black paint if you wanted to, or you could just leave it until this thing is built. Now to build my little gun emplacement is going to be a little bit different than my gun emplacement video that I did previously. Here I'm using just 4 sides. Now they're not all equal sides because the front and the back have 45-degree angles cut into the sides. These face outwards, so that when it's all put together, it looks like it's got angled corners on the outside of the building. So when I dry fit this together shortly, you'll see how that looks. I'm just cutting out the little windows there for it, and just PVA glue and pins will hold all of this together. You don't need to go into too much depth as far as this goes. Any part of this process is certainly able to be changed, or the size changed. That's why I'm not really talking too much about the dimensions here. It's just this thing is just entirely built to fit. So I figured roughly the size of the hill I wanted made up the size of the foam I cut and carved. Same with this little bunker here. I just made it sized to fit the top of the hill. So here you can see this all going together. Pins work a treat here. If you've got yourself some pins, or if you haven't got pins, go grab some, because it's fantastic for working with this foam board to hold pieces in place and make sure everything remains square. Now for the roof of this, I want the curved edges as well, so just using that little 45-degree cutter tool. If you haven't got one of those or don't have the means to get one, just you know, carefully cutting with a craft knife, you can get angled sides. They don't have to be perfect. You can see how that's going to sit on the top there and give that little bit of a beveled edge across the top of the roof. Here I'm just cutting the corners off to match the side walls of that gun emplacement. So fairly simple up to this point. That gun emplacement is not currently glued down. I will get to that a little bit later. Here I'm just going to glue on the roof. Now when I made this roof, it doesn't quite fit perfectly to that gun emplacement, but being foam board, once you've got this glued on, you can certainly go in there and push in some of these corners, anything that's kind of standing out. Once you hit it with some Mod Podge and black paint, as I've done there, will give it a little bit more structural integrity, and it'll cover up some of those mistakes as well. Now when it came to the craters that I burnt into the foam earlier, I was going to build these up, and for that process I'm using a little bit of tin foil here. And you can see me here just pressing this in, just a small sheet of tin foil just pressed into roughly the shape of a crater. Now this builds up the side walls of the crater and also gives me enough flexibility with that tin foil to be able to push down the center of the crater so that it's got that extra little bit of depth that I talked about. Now these craters sort of push in against the front and back of the gun emplacement that I've built. So just using my craft knife, it's easy enough to cut those little corners out of the crater mold that I've made here. And then as you can see, it'll press up quite nicely against the side of that bunker. This just gives our crater higher walls. Again, I'm just using the pins here to hold it in place before I actually glue these on, just so that I can make sure that the front and the back here are gonna fit. Everything's gonna sit together well before I actually glue anything. Once you start adding the glue, you know, it's a bit hard to go backwards from, so you can take a little bit of extra time and you know, make sure you've got things in the right place before you start sticking them down. Make sure everything's going to fit together, especially if you've got different elements butting up against each other like I do with these gun emplacements and the craters. So here I'm just going to glue down the gun emplacement next to those craters that I've got pinned in place. Again, just using a couple of pins to make sure I hold them. This will allow me to move on and glue in the craters and move those around without, you know, potentially moving this gun emplacement while the glue's setting. So those in place for the craters. For the tinfoil, I just used simple hot glue. Again, this is all going to be covered up with sculptamold shortly, so you don't need to worry about getting glue right to the edges. All you really want to do is get these pieces of tinfoil glued into place in the correct orientation, so that they're going to look a bit natural and you've got something a bit easier to sculpt the mold up into and make sure your craters look the way they should. Now when it came to putting the radio tower into the foam, originally I was thinking I would have to cut and glue this, but I found with the sticks that I used to build this out of, it was quite strong enough to just press straight into the foam where I wanted it. I did have to remove a couple of these little support arms that are inside the sides of the radio tower, just so that I could get it pushed down to the depth that I wanted it. But that worked really well. At this point, it's not glued in there. I think the sculptamold actually holds that fairly well in place when I get to that stage of the process. And once you kind of get that in place, you'll find it'll stay there with that sculptamold. So I've added the door there with some PVA glue held in place with some pins so it doesn't fall off. And now I'm coating the entire thing with some black paint and Mod Podge. This just gives us a nice base coat to work off, keeps everything nice and strong, and gives it a little bit of protection as well. Now for my sculptamold, I was waiting for an order of sculptamold to come through. Unfortunately, it didn't arrive in time, so I've had to make my own. Now I followed the process given by Lukes Aps in his video, and this stuff worked out just perfect. So a little bit of trial and error with the mix, trying to get it perfect. I haven't used, I have now received my bag of sculptamold, but I haven't used it, so I don't know exactly how it compares to the bought stuff. But the result was fine. It did the job exactly as I needed it to. The surface is a bit rough, but that's fine because I'm making a dirty old hill here, so that being a little bit rough in the end of the day was just fine. It's just toilet paper with some plaster of Paris mixed together, water added, and then just molded into place, and you can see there it worked just fine. Now for the next part of the process, I'm going to be adding the dirt to the hill, and this isn't going to cover the entire hill because I am going to have some areas where I'm going to add some grass. I'm just using some acrylic gap sealer here. It's the same stuff I used on my Battlemat video recently, and also some sifted dirt. So this dirt I just scooped up out of the backyard. I sifted it to make sure there was no sort of sticks or leaves or anything in it, and I've just added it into that acrylic mix there, and also added in a little bit of IPA alcohol just to get it a little bit runnier and keep it a little bit wet. Because this part of the process, we're going to paste this stuff on. As you can see there, I added a little bit of brown paint just to get the color up as well. So this part of the process, I'm just going to do in a couple of stages. So I'm just adding this mix onto where I want the dirt to be on the hills, or where I want the dirt to be exposed on the hills. And you want to make sure that your mix is quite moist, so that when you pour on this dirt, so this is the same dirt that we added to the acrylic originally, you just want to make sure that that acrylic mix is a little bit moist and a little bit wet, so that when we add this stuff on, that dirt will actually stick in there. So this first run, it was a little bit dry, but I found patting it into place and kind of pushing it in a little bit into the areas where I've added that acrylic mix, it worked fine. And it did stick in there, and it did cover it with a really nice texture and color, so I was really happy with that. Here I'm just hitting it with some IPA alcohol before I go over it with a little bit of watered down PVA to make sure it all holds in place. Now once you've allowed that to dry, I'm going to go back in now with some more coarse sand or gravel here just around the edges of the building and the hill. This is some brown battleground from Army Painter. It's a little bit coarser than the dirt I used on the top. So this comes across more as a gravel or small rocks in the build, and I'm going to go right around the edge of the hill with that as well. I find with these types of builds it's good to try and vary the different textures that you're using. So here I'm using some of the sand that I used in my Battlemat video. This is really fine sand. I found it at the hardware store. It's called playground sand, I believe. It's like beach sand, I guess, so it's really fine, and it gives us another different texture just for the main pathway at the front of the building there. Here I'm just putting more of this gravel, this brown battleground from Army Painter, around the edges of the build. This just sort of gives the impression of rocks falling down the side of the hill. And here I'm adding some more of that fine dirt that we used on the top, just to the outer edges of the base. Like I said, having some varied textures here is a really handy thing to do. It gives the build quite a bit more dimension and a little bit more character when you've got a few different things going on there. So it's a good idea to probably base coat that first layer of the base and the hill where the white is, just with some brown paint. Here I'm just going to go in and add some flocking. So the main part of this flocking will be done with this dark green army painter flock you see here, but I will be adding some other elements as well, so some different color flocks. Again, it's much like the gravel we used, different elements, different colors, and different textures as you can across here, just to give it a bit of variation. Definitely adds to it. Now here I'm coloring in the concrete facing where the front door is. And I'm adding some runs, some, dirtying it up a little bit. This has been covered in quite a few of my other videos, particularly in my guard tower video. I went through this a little bit. We'll put a link to that one as well at the top of the screen if you want to get some more detail on how I did that. Now, as far as making the top of this hill a little bit more detailed, a little bit more interesting, I'm going to be adding some Army Painter Battleground razor wire. Now, this stuff is fantastic. It's really good stuff. I wasn't too sure what it'd be like until I got it and realized straight away that it looks really good. There's probably no way I could have replicated that myself, or no way I've figured out just yet. So if you need some razor wire on your battlefield for anything, you'll find that stuff is fantastic. So here I'm just making up a couple of little barricades to mount the razor wire on, just using some super glue and some toothpicks here. I'm just going to glue these together, as you can see, and I'll show you shortly how I wrap the razor wire around these to put in place. Now, if you need to speed up your gluing process, you can use some baking soda, as you've seen me use there. That just helps the glue to dry quicker. You probably want to reinforce those joints a little bit because there's not a lot of contact on those toothpicks. So I glued them up the first time and then went around and hit them with another spot of glue and then just the baking soda. So here's the razor wire. You do get 4 meters in the box with the Army Painter stuff, which is a lot. You can see I've messed up my roll already, but this stuff, whilst you might not think it looks great when you grab it, as soon as you sort of shape it up, and you can do that just using a paintbrush or a piece of dowel or something, you just twist it around. It'll hold its shape really well. You can just slide it straight off there, and then apply that to your wherever you want. I mean, that on its own on the battlefield will look good. I've chosen to use these little stands here, these little barricades, I guess, if you like, to twist my razor wire around. And once painted up, these look fantastic. Now, I found the razor wire originally was a little bit shiny for what I wanted. It looked very nice and new. I want this to be a little bit dirty though on the battlefield, so all I did was just using a little bit of metallic paint, and in this case I have used gunmetal metallic. You can just run this over the wire. It won't thickly coat, so this is really thin metallic, so it won't actually fully coat, but it will sort of sit in the recesses. It's a little bit like a wash, but still giving that metallic look. So if you've got some metallics there, you can certainly try and do the same thing, and that will just give that razor wire a little bit more of a toned down look, so it won't be quite so new and shiny. Now, you want to make sure that when you're doing this, especially if, like me, you've got these craters and there's a fair bit of damage going on, that you add in some small elements here to sort of reflect that. So I've got here some broken barricades, some little pieces of wood from those. I've also got some broken pieces of razor wire, and this extends down the side of the hill a little bit as well. I did add a couple of small shrubs here. You can check out the video on that. I have done a video on trees before. These little shrubs were just super quick to whip up. If you're looking for something a little bit more detailed, I'd suggest checking out Leif over at Devs and Dice. He did a video on small shrubs recently, which was fantastic, and they give a little bit more detail than what I've got here. So here you can see the final product, the finished photos of this one. I was really happy with it. There's a couple of little extra details on this one. As you can see, I've added a little pole and a little wire going across to the radio tower. I've had a great time doing this one. I had a lot of fun making up the sculptamold and playing with a few different things in this one. The razor wire from Army Painter was cool. I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have any questions about the build, if you'd like to see me do some more stuff with that sculptamold or show you how I made it, I can certainly do that. Just let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this one if you think you might know someone that'll get something out of this video as well. Thanks to my Patreon supporters, and thanks everyone for watching. Have a great one.